Hi, my name is Rebecca Thompson Hitt. I'm the founder and executive director of the Consciously Parenting Project, and this is the Consciously Parenting Podcast. We're going to be talking with parenting visionaries, professionals, and parents to guide you and inspire you to be the most connected parent you can be. We've been talking with Scott and Noelle of The Daily Groove about the Continuum concept and creating community. Today we're going to be talking about creating your village and finding other non-conformists.
So when people are just beginning, and we don't have models in our culture, we have nuclear families. So how do people even begin to start looking at, well, okay, I've got so many people that I know in my community who live in rural Georgia, or they live in a place where there's nobody else who understands what they're doing, but they're completely isolated. So how do people even begin to find others? And I know we've talked about lots and lots of different ways, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, the most obvious thing, of course, is to relocate here to Portland, Oregon.
Yes, obviously.
where my wife could nurse a 6-year-old and not have anyone freak out about it.
That is helpful.
Not a lot of nursing in public at that point, but the point is, I hear a lot of horror stories about people who are trying to do things naturally and then being shamed or even, arrested for certain things. Yeah. But you tend to hear about that happening in the more conservative places. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, like, if you can't find an oasis of progressivism and open-mindedness and creativity around where you are, you might need to actually, relocate it if that's just not anywhere to be found where you live.
Right.
And I'm kidding. Obviously, you can find that everywhere. And I think ultimately everyone wants to free themselves from the constraints of conformity and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think if you make the choice to be a nonconformist, to say I'm not going to do things the way my society tells me I should do them, then you really do need to find other nonconformists. Unless you have a really strong persona,
mm-hmm.
I don't need any social support. Most people need some social support. So you need, most people begin by finding that online. And it's just comforting to know, even if most of them are in another state or in another country, it's still comforting to know that they're out there and you feel a little closer to them when you move into connection. That's what we did on the Continuum list way back in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
But that, you want to try to create that in real life as well. So I always used to advise people to just go where weird people go,
Right.
Usually it's like a health food store, or people who
yoga class,
or just where do alternative people go? People who think outside the box already. And occasionally you bump into people that they're too far outside the box for you. It's like, I'm not really into like waiting for the aliens to come, but, but if you're into that sort of thing, I don't know. I think you really have to be open-minded, and just accept that once you leave the mainstream, there's a million different streams you could enter. And and because of that, it's really hard to find people that are exactly like you. But if you can agree on some basic things, and then just be accepting and tolerant with regard to things you may not agree with, but aren't, crucial. I mean, if someone, like, there's certain things you have to be in agreement with. Like, if there's a family that believes strongly that corporal punishment is appropriate, like for me and any of the people that I work with, that's just too far outside of what can be tolerated as far as, well, if you're going to be violent toward your children, I can't really engage in community with you. I bless you on your way. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to condemn people. And that just makes you part of the problem instead of part of the solution. So
Right.
bless them on their way. It's like, look, I just need to be around people who are embracing this new way of thinking about how to relate with children as partners, not as dominators.
Right.
So to me, that's why I've sort of distilled a lot of these values down to the four that I think really people can rally around. It's hard to disagree with the idea that partnership is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to disagree that being authentic is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to disagree that trust and being heart-centered, those are very good things that anyone can agree that it feels good to be in partnership and to be yourself and to be trustworthy and trusting and to be loving. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's rally around those things and then see how we put them into practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when I was first beginning, I had this long list of things, all right, I need someone who believes this and this and this and this and this. And I remember having a conversation with my midwife she was the one who, gave me such sage advice and told me to read books like this one. And I remember sitting down with her one day and saying, I'm really having trouble finding other people that I can really connect with. And I had found this one mother who was a stay-at-home mom, but I don't know, there were some of the parenting things she was doing that weren't quite in alignment with me. And so I was finding fault in that. And yeah, I was really struggling with that. And she just said, start with something, like start with stay-at-home moms. You've already got something in common. You've already both, you've all made the decision to be home, that's a commitment. And then you can go from there. But if you squash your funnel down too quickly, you're going to miss people who might, be exploring some of these ideas, who might actually be really good companions for you on this journey. And, and actually, ironically, one of my really, really good friends who I'm still in connection with, she's a chiropractor named Maritza Paz Fernandez, got a lot of names too. And she was working, but, had read the Continuum concept, also had her baby on her back at work. She's a chiropractor, so even though she was working, we had so much in common because, we had so many of the same values. So I actually found somebody who was outside of that stay-at-home mom, circle, but she had so many of those values. So I think that conversation really helped me to open up my eyes and broaden my perspective even bigger than I had been, even bigger than what she was suggesting, because I just needed people who got the essence of what I was trying to do.
That's great. I'm thinking about how, like, in hindsight, looking back on my journey and my wife and me and how we went through all this, and how after we initially read the Continuum concept and said, like, we became kind of zealous about it. As in the word zealot.
Right.
Our way is right. Everything else is wrong.
Right.
And we had a neighbor who they had a new baby as well. And we would hear their baby crying because they were doing a more conventional, just let the baby cry it out thing. And of course, we were really on board with, like, when you never let your baby cry. As soon as they start to whimper, you pick them up. And so I remember just being so upset about that. Like, it was just and they were nice people, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
friendly toward them,
beating their baby.
But I remember just like, I just really want to tell them how wrong they are.
Yeah.
And part of that was just because we were still so new to it all.
Right.
That we didn't have that the strong foundation and the sort of the deep roots that would have allowed us to just be in a place of acceptance about it. And I think when you're new to some of these ideas, you kind of have to go through a stage of being a fundamentalist, like this is right and everything else is wrong.
Right.
Until eventually you realize, you get enough experience and you realize, oh, here's a person that is like, now our kids are older and this is one of our best friends. And by the way, what they sleep trained their baby, at 10 years ago or whatever. And like in that immediacy of especially the newborn period, and especially when you're new to these ideas, it's hard to see the big picture and how people will come to these deeper truths in very different ways. And you really have to try to be as accepting as you can so that you don't succumb to the temptation to condemn them. Because as soon as you make them wrong, you actually undermine your own ultimate goal, which is to create a culture of connectedness. I mean, why else are we holding our babies?
Right, right.
We're trying to create a culture of connectedness. And if you say, well, I disconnect from you because you're not as connected as me,
right.
I'm committed to connectedness, therefore I disconnect from you. It just doesn't really make any sense.
Right.
But it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that when it's still a fragile seedling in your own consciousness.
Yeah.
So I have compassion for parents who are in that stage, but now that I'm well beyond it, it sometimes is annoying. Like, oh yeah, they're doing that thing where they have all these litmus tests. They don't, do you vaccinate? Do you circumcise? Do you sleep train? Do you, blah, blah, there's all these,
are you eating organic whole food? Are you?
Exactly. Right. You have TV. And then there's the people who it's like, if you don't have TV, you're bad. And there's the people who, if you do have TV, you're bad.
Right.
So it's interesting how easily it can become fractured. But ultimately, if you want community, you have to think beyond the specifics of right and wrong and focus more on accepting that everyone is in a process, and we're all moving toward our natural. I think it's built into us to seek connectedness. We're social animals, and so we're all finding our way back to that. We've lost what we had when we all lived in a tribal or hunter-gatherer type way of growing up with the same people and really functioning not as communities but as extended families. And we've lost all the benefits of that and replaced them with consumer goods and services. And at some level, we know that's wrong. We feel unsatisfied for that. So we're seeking, because it's in our DNA to seek that authentic social connection. But everyone's going to find their way back to it in a different way. We just have to accept that.
Right. So how have some people started to find their way back to that? What have you seen with the parents that you've come into contact with?
Well, I like this sort of holistic perspective that things are kind of in concentric circles. So it starts with yourself, right? Just your relationship with your inner self, and then somehow that shifts. Sometimes it's something external that makes it shift. Sometimes it's just an internal knowing where you recognize you want to change course and move more toward partnership and away from the kind of competitive separation mindedness that is part of our culture. And that begins with just sort of connecting with yourself, which is why authenticity is really a key part of that path. Is like I need to know who I am and be true to who I am.
Right.
So that's sort of where you begin. And from there, the next concentric circle is me and my baby, right? Or me and my partner, or our small nuclear family, because that's sort of how it is. And you start to align and shift in that smaller context. And then from there, the next level out is, your immediate circle of friends and family. And how do I create either better supportive relationships with my family of origin or my extended family, or sort of creating an honorary family by connecting with like-minded people, or taking existing relationships and evolving them. But sometimes there's a kind of a sifting out process where, like, let's say you have a best friend from college, and you have your baby and she has her baby, and then she goes a different path, like she goes a more conventional, punitive, control-oriented parenting. And it's like, okay, I feel like we can't support each other. Like, I can't really support what you're doing. I can support you because I love you. Right.
Right.
I can't really agree with, some of the things that are happening. And so you try your best to be respectful. But then sometimes it's, in the other way, it's like, and that person is like, keeps telling you, well, if you would only just lay down the law with your child and just show him who's boss, blah, blah, blah. And then that's exactly the opposite of the kind of support that you need. Right. So in that case, it often you'll have a make or break moment with those kind of relationships. It's like, maybe we can't be mommy friends, maybe, let's rekindle this friendship when our kids are older. Or it might be just like, you just do your best to hold steadfast to these values that you're working on internalizing. And sometimes your friends will say, well, it does feel right. I want to try doing what you're doing, and then you move into alignment that way. But one way or another, you need to be connecting with people who can reinforce the subculture that you're trying to create. But I think it moves into those concentric circles. It has to start with yourself, because if all you do is just say, okay, I believe in baby carrying, so I'm just going to connect with a baby carrying support group that I found on meetup.com. It's like, but if you haven't done an internal work of really getting clear about who you are, then you will find yourself being sort of slapped around by whatever is the fad du jour, and people saying, this is the way you should do things. And like, okay, well, that's what they said I should do. And then you're still not connected to that inner guidance.
Right.
So one way or another, you need to really address that interior before you get too far to the exterior.
Right. Yeah. And then, like you said, I remember going through this with different friends and even family members, as I became more clear on what was appropriate, what I was going to do with my baby and what I wasn't, then I could kind of figure out where those relationships were, what kind of support I could get from my mother-in-law, for example, might have been different. She might not really get what I'm doing, but if I'm clear, then I can at least set my boundaries and, figure out where my little circle is and who I'm inviting inside. I think a lot of people end up, for one reason or another, saying, I think I need to start over. I need to just create a new family and find some other like-minded people. And so I know you've got a project that you're working on now. It's a new idea that you're working on to really bring people together. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
So I have some, I have both ideas on the local level and ideas on the global level. So locally, my wife and I are toying around with some ideas of creating some sort of a center where people share support. And that those ideas are a little bit too nascent to really even talk about. But I'm also I'm preparing to relaunch an online support network, really geared toward the type of people that I serve through my writing, through my blog, which is designed to help people create the shift in consciousness that we've been talking about. And so that will eventually attract people that want to share support online. And I'm hoping that eventually that coalesces into local, as a way for people to create local connections as well. I think sometimes the advantage of doing things online is that through the miracle of the internet and Google and everything else, you can very rapidly get to people who are very aligned with what you want to be aligned with.
Right.
And you're drawing from a pool of billions of people, not just, the few thousands of people that might be around you in your local area.
Right.
So I think when you need that highly aligned support, especially in the beginning, that's a good way to do it. And then over time, you sort of need to cultivate that locally, but also cultivate the ability to tolerate an imperfect match. So that if I want to share local face-to-face support with people, they don't have to be as perfect as that person in New Zealand that I met, because we're a perfect match, but we happen to live on opposite sides of the planet.
Right. Yeah. So in your parenting experience, I know there've been lots of iterations of what community has looked like for you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that your family has had available in your community, and resources, and how you found other people?
Sure. So at the very beginning, I would say the very first support group we had was La Leche League. And that was really for my wife. I don't think I would have been allowed to go to those meetings.
Right. Yeah.
But that was the first sort of experience either one of us had for a parenting support community. And that was great. And La Leche League, of course, hopefully everyone here knows what that is, an international breastfeeding support organization. And they tend to go beyond just breastfeeding support, but they tend to support people who are nurturing in general. So, so that was a great place in the beginning when my wife was just sort of figuring it all out and overwhelmed by everything. And then we got into the Continuum concept. So we got in some online support. And after that grew big enough, I would say we were about a year and a half or two into parenthood when there were enough people locally that were also part of that international group that we said, let's get together locally. We started a support group. We had to take the initiative because no one else did it. It's sometimes you just have to take the initiative. And so we said, let's find the people that out of this group of like-minded people internationally, let's take those who are local and form a support group. And we did. We had a Portland area Continuum parenting support group. And it wasn't like we didn't start a nonprofit or anything. It was just we're an informal group of like-minded people who want to support each other. And that went through various forms of both online and offline connecting. We did actually do things like, maybe it was a subgroup of that group or something. Oh no. Okay. I'm confusing two things anyway. Yeah. We tried a lot of things over the years.
Yes.
One of the interesting ones was there was also another group of people that had met online through the Continuum list. And they weren't all in the same area. A few of them were from this area, but some were from other countries. But we had, even within that very like-minded broader group of the Continuum parents, we also had this extra sort of resonation. We kind of were also maybe interested in the overlap between these sort of natural principles and spiritual principles. And so there was a group that formed around that convergence. And it started out as an online group, but it quickly grew into something that's like, let's get together in real life. And we created our own sort of retreats.
Nice.
The first one, which was too far away, we weren't able to go to. The second one was organized to happen not far from where we live. So, and as it turned out, we were with that group on September 11th, 2001. We were at a campground at the Oregon coast.
Wow.
And, we woke up that morning and there was all this buzz in the campground. People that weren't part of our group were playing their radios, and it was very interesting. It's kind of like our parents' generation is like, where were you when JFK was shot?
Yeah.
And mine, it's where were you when on 9/11? And where I was to me, it has this really poignant significance, which is I was with a group of like-minded people living the dream of community and connectedness, while a group of terrorists was plotting to undermine that.
Right.
So, but that's one example of something, or a few examples of some of the kinds of things that we've done over the years. At one point actually it was before that particular gathering on the eve of the new century, we had been talking with a lot of other people about intentional communities. And we thought, let's start an intentional community for people who want to raise their kids in alignment with the Continuum concept. And we actually, we formulated a plan, and we said, or it was a plan to make a plan, actually. So we just started kind of with a vision, and then said, let's get whoever's interested, let's all get together and do some collaborative visioning. And we actually had a group of people from all over the world. The farthest one was Germany. Someone came, and people came from all over the country and from a few other countries. And we had about maybe between 15 and 20 people that came, or families that came and said, let's have this get together and talk about how we could create an intentional community with these shared values. And that was a really fascinating experience for a couple of reasons. One is that the best part of that gathering was the gathering before the gathering. So what happened is that we planned this big meeting, and since people were coming from far away, several of them came and camped in our front yard or in backyard, and we sort of, our house became this communal place. We had a tiny house at the time, so it was very funny. But all these people came a few days early to prepare for this big meeting. And while we were preparing to talk about living in a more tribal way, we had this ad hoc tribe that we had created. And it was really one of the sweetest times I can recall. And in hindsight, what made it work is that we were just waiting. Like we didn't have an agenda. We were just waiting, right? We were waiting for that meeting. But while we were waiting, we were just being with each other. And enjoying each other's company. And the kids were running around, and the adults were, cooking together and playing guitars. And, it was a really beautiful community experience. So, and then we had finally everyone converged for this meeting. And then we got into our control minds. And everyone started talking about, well, what should we do? Like, we should buy land. How should we organize it financially? What should be our governance model? should it be urban or rural? All these things, like we started debating, and it wasn't this lovely just being together. Right.
Right.
And then, there was this kind of scandalous thing that sort of happened that I won't even go into. It was unexpected yuckiness that freaked everyone out. And after that, everything sort of fell apart. Mm-hmm. So after that initial planning meeting, we all kind of dropped the ball, and that was right before our second child was born. So we kind of needed to focus on that. But to me, the gift of that whole experience was having had that experience of just being in community and what is possible when people are just fully present and not inside any control agenda.
I hope you've been enjoying this conversation with Scott and Noelle of The Daily Groove as we talk about the Continuum concept and building community. I hope that you'll join us next week as we talk about building community organically. For more information, please visit the Consciously Parenting website, consciouslyparenting.com.